Hey, if you don't happen to know who I am, my name is Reece and I am the owner and founder of Define. Today we're going to be covering a basic eyeshadow application with our Essentials palette. And the Essentials palette is extremely versatile. You've probably seen it in other tutorials for contour, you've seen it for blush and brows, and another use for it is eyeshadow. So you can also use any of these colors for eyeshadow. Before this tutorial, we covered how to read any eyeshadow palette, so that's going to set the foundational knowledge that you'll need for today's tutorial. So definitely be sure you watch that before you watch any of our eyeshadow tutorials, because it's going to make a lot more sense and it's going to just take your eyeshadow looks to the next level because you understand all of that foundational knowledge. So we're going to use our Essentials palette today, like I mentioned, and you're also going to want a fluffy crease brush on hand. Now, before we get into this, I do have my eyeshadow primer already applied and done. If you need to watch the tutorial on that, go back and watch eyeshadow primer because that'll show you exactly how I put my eyeshadow primer on. So fluffy crease brush, and first we are going to load up this white or kind of cream shade inside of the Essentials palette. So, and one thing I do like to do, I realize this is a little bit different from other people when they go to grab eyeshadow, I like to kind of swirl it and then tap off any excess. So my mom told me that was something I do that she had never seen before. So just in case that was the technique you guys wanted to pick up on. I'm going to smooth out the eyeshadow primer I have. I don't want any lines. I don't want any creasing as a base, so I'm just warming that back up really quickly with my hand. It's my dog going down the stairs. You know, we love recording from our house. But anyways, we are going to pat press this from the start of our brow all the way up to the arch. And inside of how to read any eyeshadow palette, this is going to be the white that I mentioned. It's matte, there is no shimmer in it, and this is where we are going to place it. Next, we are going to place our highlighter. So our highlighter is going to be this white as well, because inside of this palette, it's the closest to white because it basically is white. So pat press from the arch all the way down to the tail of our brow, and we're going to place this in the inner corner as well. I'm going to do my other eye really quickly, just to catch that one up to speed. So pat press, because if I'm sliding when I'm doing my eyeshadow, it's also not going to stick to the eyeshadow primer. If it's not sticking to the eyeshadow primer, it's not going to lock, and you might see a little bit of sliding throughout the day. So a pat press motion is absolutely key to applying eyeshadow. Take your fluffy crease brush, and we are going to swipe it really quickly on a towel. This essentially just gets off that pigment from the brush so we can use our next shade. Now we're going to go for our transition shade. I don't know why it was so hard for me to say. And there are two options that we have inside of this palette. We have the light brown and the caramel are going to be your transition shade options. However, for today's tutorial, we are going to be using the caramel shade. So I'm going to load up my caramel shade, tap off any excess, and you're going to go ahead and feel for your brow bone. We're going to go slightly on top of / slightly underneath it, because the purpose of this transition, I'm having a hard time with this word today. Transition color is essentially to create that shadow for your brow bone. It's kind of a contour color, if that makes sense. That might go a little bit over your head if you haven't watched the contour tutorial yet. However, it'll make sense in a second. So feel for your brow bone. And now I'm going to place it just on the bottom of my brow bone, but mostly in that area where it's kind of connecting to my eyelid. And you're going to pat press the first 50% of the way over. And now I'm going to break that rule a little bit, and we are just going to use a blending or a sliding motion to get it close to that inner corner of the eye. And you're going to notice that it's heavier over here in terms of pigment, and it's a little bit more diffused the closer it gets to the inner corner of the eye. And that's exactly what we want to see. So pat press that first 50% of the way over, and then we're going to blend and use a sliding motion for the rest of the 50% of the way down, angling it towards the inner corner of our eye. Now you're going to take the brush, swipe it on a towel again, and we're going to blend this time. I cannot stress to you how light the pressure is that I'm using. It's barely touching my skin when I'm using the brush, but we're doing little back and forth motions, and it's coming essentially from my fingers. It's not coming from my elbow. It's not coming from my wrist. I'm not going crazy like this. I'm blending it from my fingers. So blending this color back and forth, making sure you get the top where it's going to connect to that white shade that we have placed. We're blending it on the bottom where it will connect to the rest of our eyeshadow. Just going back and forth, making sure that's nice and diffused. And you can totally see the difference in my two eyelids if I look down. This one's very soft and diffused, and this one looks a little bit more chunky or blocky. So again, very, very light pressure. You should barely feel those bristles moving across your skin, because the more pressure you use, the more pigment you'll lose. I want you to remember that rhyme until you've got it down in your head. The more pressure you use, the more pigment you'll lose. So if you want the colors to be really vibrant in your eyeshadow look, use less pressure when blending. It's as simple as that. I know you're like, Reece, that was not a simple concept. However, trust me, we're gonna make things really easy here. I'm gonna take my finger real quick, just smooth out my eyeshadow primer to make sure it's good to go. And the next color we are going to look for is our intensifier. And in this palette, it is going to be our dark brown. So still, with the fluffy crease brush, we're gonna load up that dark brown, and we're going to pat press this on the outer corner of our eye. And we're going for about the outer 40%, so not going quite halfway on our eyelid. Pat press to place this, almost in like a V or a C is what we're going for, but a filled in V or C, if that makes sense. So pat pressing that, getting it placed. Same thing on the other eye, pat pressing to place. And like I mentioned in the eyeshadow primer tutorial, if you need more help getting that color, you can take your finger and gently pull up. Let me show you how that would look. If I were looking at a mirror in my bathroom, I would take this finger, pull up, and then pat press to place. That was a really awesome face. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So anyways, we're going back to this, pat pressing to get it placed. Now we're going to swipe this on a towel. I was going to say swipe this towel on a brush, and that's not going to work. So swipe your brush on a towel, and we're going to blend that, very light pressure again, into the transition shade on the outside where it meets the rest of what's on your face already, and the middle where it's going to meet another color. Again, I cannot stress, very light pressure, so you can see the difference in unblended versus blended. It's very soft and diffused. So if you're afraid of a color in a palette, sometimes when you blend it and if you use more pressure, it's going to look a little bit softer. Because I know some people are like, oh, okay, that dark brown might even be a little bit much for me. But once you get to blending it, and if you use more pressure, then you can actually get it to go more of like a light brown. And it's not gonna look as harsh as it may seem in a palette. I mean, it's not a harsh color, but that's just a little tip there. So I'm using really light pressure, getting all those areas. And then if you feel like, I feel like one side's missing a little bit of pigment, you can bring more back in, and you're just going to pat press that. I call it on the core of the color, so I'm not applying it to the top where I blended, the side or the middle. I'm really just pat pressing that again into the core of the color. So now I have that placed, and we are ready to move on to our last color. Now we are going to work with an accent color, and you have two options. Actually, technically we have four. So we have two primary options, and that's what we're going to focus on in today's tutorial, and that is the gold or the pink shimmer. You could also use, if you didn't, actually we're not going to cover that. That's a whole other theory. So let's just focus on this today. I won't scroll you guys. But we have two accent options for today's tutorial. You have the gold or the pink shimmer, and I'm going to load the gold shimmer, making sure we tap off any excess. And now we are going to place this on the remainder of our eyelid space, angling it down towards the inner corner of our eye. So pat press, and this shimmer shade is going to bring a lot of light into the inner corner of the eye. So it's definitely going to help it look more awake and alive. Pat press. That side is done. Same thing over here. Pat press. And this side is complete. Perfect. Now we're going to blend it just a little bit so it's soft and diffused. So I swiped my brush on the towel. I'm going to blend the top where it meets the transition here. A little bit in the middle where it meets the dark brown. And you are good to go. So that is a basic eyeshadow application. I will put on mascara after this, but that's the only other thing you would need to do, and then you're good and ready to go out the door for the day. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you all in the next tutorial.